What would happen if you took Smackdown vs. Raw 2009, stripped it of any ounce of fun the game had, as well as all of its features? Well, what you're left with is none other than Legends of WrestleMania, and please, for the love of God, give me SVR 2009 back. Yes, Legends of WrestleMania, the often forgotten spin-off of the Smackdown vs. Raw series, and trust me, there is a good reason for why this game isn't remembered by many. In the late 2000s to the early 2010s, the mainline Smackdown vs. Raw series wasn't doing too hot, as SVR 08 was met with pretty mixed reception, and when SVR 09 came out a year later, it really didn't do too much to show people that the SVR they knew and loved would ever be the same again. So what do you do when people are losing faith in your product? Well, you put out a worse one, of course, and that's exactly what THQ did with Legends of WrestleMania, as they decided to take everything that made SVR great and get rid of all of it in order to make a slimmed down and more simplified wrestling game, with the center focus being on Legends from the 80s to early 90s. Now, I will admit, it is a game that sounds cool in concept, especially when you consider that playable Legends weren't super prevalent in SVR at this time, so to get a game that was entirely focused on Legends could have been legitimately interesting. The issue is that THQ and Yuke's only had maybe a day to work on the game, and what we ended up getting was a wrestling game where half the wrestling is done by QuickTime events. Why? Who asked for this? Sure, you could say, oh, well, this game wasn't meant for you. It was meant for the people who grew up with the old NES and arcade wrestling games. Yeah, sure, but the game is heavily advertised as being an expansion to Smackdown vs. Raw 2009, and there's ads for it plastered everywhere in SVR 2010. If this was truly meant for one specific group of people, then I don't think they would have bothered trying to market it to the Smackdown vs. Raw audience, aka the same audience that this game wasn't meant for, supposedly. And that leads us into the biggest problem with Legends of WrestleMania: the gameplay. Somehow, someway, they made a wrestling game where you hardly do anything, and half the damn gameplay is simplified to just press a button when the game tells you to. And they expected people to absolutely love it. As I said earlier, I get they wanted to make this game more in line with the type of wrestling game someone in their 40s would have grown up playing, but I guarantee you that even they would find this game to be boring as hell. Pretty much everything you do in this game is boiled down to just being a quick time event, from finishers to basic ass grapple moves, and I just don't understand how anyone could find that fun in the slightest. My biggest pet peeve in a wrestling game, or any game in general, is when control is constantly being taken away from me. When I do a grapple move and I'm forced to watch the same canned animation every single time, it just gets to a point where I'm no longer having fun. I'm just sad. Now, that's not to say there isn't positives to the gameplay though, as I do like the fact that getting up from a move is made more interactive by having to mash every button on the controller at once, and the actual wrestling is very fast and fluid. Well, what else can I say that's positive? I mean, I like how the game looks, for the most part. The overall visuals and style of the game looks pretty good, and the game does a great job at nailing the whole 80s and 90s look, but that's about all I can really say when it comes to the positives. Everything else about the game is honestly pretty bad. I mean, hell, for one, the controls feel like they don't even work half the time. What about this control scheme is simplified? You're telling me you have to press B twice to sprint, which also happens to be the pick up weapon button, and even then it doesn't even feel like it works half the time. Yeah, the controls aren't great, and they're by far the weakest part of the overall gameplay experience outside of the constant QTEs, of course. Outside of the gameplay, we of course have to talk about the match type selection, because while it is about as basic as you can imagine, it is fairly decent. For a game like this, I'm not expecting too many match types, and I mean, in the 80s, there were only about, 3 match types in all of the WWE, so it makes sense that the selection here isn't going to be massive. By far, the best match type in the game, though, is definitely Hell in a Cell, as every cell match starts with you and your opponent on top of the cell, which I'm 99% sure is supposed to be a reference to Mankind and Undertaker at King of the Ring 1998, which is honestly really cool that they did that. On top of that, the match type is also just incredibly fun. Being able to throw your opponent off the cell, through the announce table, and then immediately after being able to just break through the wall of the cell is fucking awesome. Other than that, the rest of the match types play pretty much just how you would expect them to. So how about we move on to the arena selection? Now, this has to be the most basic arena selection I've ever seen, but you know what? I'll let it slide. I was not expecting much from the arena selection, as they did pretty much all they had to do in just making the first 15 WrestleManias playable, and that was it. They did also include a classic Royal Rumble arena, which was nice, and I gotta say, for what they're worth, I actually like the arenas in this game. They all look absolutely fantastic and fairly accurate, which for a half-assed game like this is pretty impressive. WrestleMania 9, for example, looks great, and I especially love the way WrestleMania WrestleMania 11 looks. Yuke's and THQ nailed the overall presentation and look of each arena, and I can commend them for that. You can definitely tell that if this game had maybe spent more time in development and wasn't just put out as a blatant cash grab, that it could have been something far more special. But no, for some reason they just needed to rush this game out the door because someone out there was eager to play this damn game. Not talking about the roster, honestly, for what it's worth, it ain't half bad. You have just about all the classic superstars you can imagine, from Ultimate Warrior to Andre the Giant, and even Purple Gloved Undertaker. Most of the superstars in this game look pretty damn good too, and then others look like King Kong Bundy. Seriously, they couldn't have at least tried a little harder on making his model look even slightly better. Now, if you're not happy with this game's roster as is, they did include the option to import your SmackDown vs. Raw 2009 roster if you had an existing SVR 2009 save file on your hard drive. Finally, I can live out my dream match of Jimmy Wang Yang versus Bam Bam Bigelow. Having SmackDown vs. Raw 2009 alongside Legends of WrestleMania definitely improves the overall experience of the game and takes him from being a bad wrestling game to a mediocre one. Overall though, the core parts of Legends of WrestleMania are just okay. Sure, the gameplay makes me want to throw my controller at the wall sometimes, but everything else like the arena selection and the roster is fine enough. A good arena selection and roster doesn't save this game from being not good though. But if you just couldn't get enough of the awful gameplay, then you're in luck because this game has extra modes for you to play. No! What the hell happened here? These extra modes are by far the biggest missed opportunity in this entire game. As well, they're all pretty cool in concept, being able to relive, rewrite, and redefine various matches from WrestleMania history, and running through a series of matches in a tower-like game mode to get into the Hall of Fame. They're just so repetitive to the point where it's tedious. The first mode I want to talk about is the one that this entire game's marketing was centered around: WrestleMania Tour Mode, where you relive all your favorite matches from WrestleMania history. And by that, I mean 6. There's only 6 matches to play through, 4 of which are Hulk Hogan matches. Oh, come on! Now, to their credit, this was the first time they'd ever done anything like this, and they did at least animate all the iconic moments in the matches, which is more than what 2K24 did, and sometimes these moments are even made interactive with QTEs, which is about the only time I can give the QTEs a pass in this game. The problem is that these matches are made all the more tedious by objectives that you need to complete in order to progress and obtain a gold medal from. The objectives aren't hard by any means, or at least they shouldn't be, but due to the terrible controls, they can be a bit of a pain in the ass to complete. Once you're done with reliving all those matches, you can then move on to rewrite history. Just as long as you follow the objectives though, because God forbid you have too much freedom. And then there's redefine, which does stuff like put Andre the Giant and Big John Studd in Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania 1, because, you know, why not? And if playing through real life matches you've already seen on TV a million times isn't your thing, then there's the Legend Killer mode, which is just a glorified towers mode. You have a series of Legends towers to play through, and for each tower you complete, you get a gold medal. What do the gold medals do? Well, you can view them in the Hall of Fame, which does absolutely nothing. So what the hell is the point? Now, I do like the overall presentation of how these modes are displayed, as if they're in some sort of WWE vault or something, but I mean, outside of that, the modes just aren't all that great. With all that being said, Legends of WrestleMania is not a good game. When it comes to just being a super casual Legends-focused version of SmackDown vs. Raw, it does its job, sure, but I don't think that excuses the fact that the game is just bad. Just because it's made for a more casual audience shouldn't mean that it can't be a good game. I definitely think the concept could have worked, but due to it being rushed, it doesn't feel nearly as good as it could have had they spent more time on it. And I mean, come on, casual games can be good too. Just look at... Yeah, I think I treated you too harshly.